he grew up in Queens, New York, working for his dad, who was, a constructor in construction. I don't know how he does it. When I was there at Mar-a-Lago when he announced November before last that he's running again, and halfway through the speech, and if your listeners haven't watched it, it's one of his best speeches. It's a relatively short one. It's about 40 minutes long. It's the relaunch of his campaign. And halfway through, I'm the guy who worked for him in the White House, and I had like this gut punch. I thought, oh my God, he's doing it again after what they put him through.
So I've rolled out the red carpet in terms of the flags today. And over my shoulder, if you're not watching this on YouTube, which you can do, you will see the flags of the Intelligence Corps, which for those that are, part of this show since the inception will know my Intelligence Corps background, as well as that of today's guest, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who served in the Intelligence Corps. So that's something we've got in common. And I've also rolled out the Star Spangled Banner as well of the United States, which is now his home nation. But we'll get into all of that. But anyway, Seb, it's really good to meet you. I've been following you for a while, and I'm sure many of our listeners will be interested to those stories linked to the flags I've just mentioned. But a little bit going on in US politics at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. I'm. What do the kids say? I'm jelly now because I've got a little Ink Corps, desk flag in my office. Yours looks massive, but I do have my old beret, the biggest beret the Ink Corps quartermaster ever issued, allegedly. And you've got the flag protocol right on the stars and stripes. When people do it vertically, they always flip it the wrong way, but you've got it right. So congratulations, and thank you for having me on your super show.
Well, no, I've been desperate to get you on the show because we have had international guests in the past, and it's something we want to do more of. But US politics is so contemporary. Us on this side of the pond, we're obsessed by everything going on. Yeah. But what we see is obviously viewed through the eyes of the media. So actually having it firsthand from someone that's operated within the White House is going to be fascinating. But your background is actually quite complex because you were born in the UK. You grew up in a mixture of the UK, Hungary, and in 2012 swore the oath of allegiance to the United States. And actually, I'm going to disagree with you on this one, though, Seb. We're going to fall out from the off.
What?
You say that the US is the greatest nation, which I clearly dispute with the UK. But the one thing you have said is that only in America can a person like you have done the things that you have. I mean, why do you think that is?
Well, let me just tell you a little story. So, and for all of those of you who are confused, we're recording this on Ash Wednesday. So I'm not, messed up in the forehead because I headbutted somebody. I just literally came from church. So January 21st, 2017 was the day after the inauguration of President Trump, who wasn't a politician, had never been a politician, never run for anything, and won the first time. Now, that was a Saturday. But I thought, hey, I'm going to go to work because I'm a deputy assistant to the president. I don't drink. I haven't had a drop since my parents died. So I wasn't hungover from the inauguration ball. So I said, okay, let's go to the White House. And I was driven in an unmarked van by a little black sergeant in the army who was my driver. Took me through the compound, through the Delta devices, into the executive building, where I did my last paperwork for HR, what my bank transfer details are. They printed me my White House pass. And then, so get this, I still get shivers I've told this story, I don't know, 100 times. And I walked into the West Wing. There's nobody there because it's Saturday. Everybody's hungover. And I walk around the West Wing with a guy with my accent who 5 years previously wasn't even a citizen. And I'm picking up my office. And it just blows my mind. And there's a female Secret Service agent, a uniform division, sitting at a desk in front of the glass doors to the Rose Garden, where all the iconic photographs of, Reagan and Arafat and Gorbachev. And I say to this young female officer, how far can I go? And she says to me, what color is your badge, sir? And I look down at my badge, which is still warm from the printer. And I say, it's blue. And she goes, sir, you can go wherever you want. And she touches the hidden button under the desk, and the doors to the Rose Garden and to the main residence of the White House open. And I go, oh my gosh, You know, there's nowhere on earth, we could disagree about which is the greatest nation, but there is no nation on this planet where me, an immigrant with a funny accent, can end up as deputy assistant for strategy to the president of a nation with 12 nuclear aircraft carriers and 4,000 nuclear missiles. If I hadn't gone to Eton or Harrow, forget about working in, 10 Downing Street. If I didn't go to the right schools in France and Paris, I'd never ended up working in the Elysee. I mean, the melting pot cliche is utterly true because me, an immigrant from Ealing, ends up in the White House. That's just, it's stunning, still stunning to me.
So there are plenty of pinch yourself moments during that time.
So just being alone in the Oval Office with the president, talking about national security issues, him asking me my advice, or flying on Air Force One. Guys, the movies are cool and everything else, and Harrison Ford is the president, blah, blah, blah. But actually, real life is cooler. When you're sitting on a couch that's sideways, a leather couch on Air Force One, you walk into the president's private office, you're eating the fish tacos made by the Navy mess corporals, in the bowels of Air Force One. It's just, it's still something I'm trying to internalize 7-8 years later.
Even now. And is the set in those dramas the same? Was it accurate as?
Oh, thank you for asking. No, absolutely garbage. The West Wing is tiny. The West Wing is literally 2 corridors in an L shape. You can, forget the West Wing TV show where, you'll have Sheen walking around the West Wing for 40 minutes. The whole West Wing, you can tour it in 4 minutes, okay? That's it. Most of the people work in the massive neo-Gothic Eisenhower Executive Building that's across the boulevard from the West Wing. But the West Wing itself is tiny, tiny.
Yeah, and that's reflective of number 10. I've had the privilege of being in number 10 a few times, and it's exactly the same. It's actually quite small.
Right.
But then all of a sudden you find all these little, it's like a bit of a TARDIS in places. But yeah, I still pinch myself when I do go to number 10, which on occasion through the work within the veterans community, I've been invited to and had that privilege. But so the first time you met Trump though was in the infamous Trump Tower, and you've got an amazing story about that first meeting. I mean, the Trump that we all know from reality TV, and there's going to be kind of an anglicized impression of that we have from this side of the pond, to the Trump that you have worked with and met. I mean, are they completely different, or is it a bit of a hybrid of the caricature that we may perceive Trump to be?
Well, first things first, I find it amusing that the Brits know so much about American politics, and
we're obsessed.
Oh yeah, like mates of mine, like trigonometry, can have whole shows that are about American politics, and it's like 2 stand-up comedians with a podcast in the UK. And of course, you're a green slime ink core guy because you've done your homework. So when it comes to I'll talk about my first meeting, but I do a lot of, I have a national radio show 3 hours a day. I have a TV show, but I do a lot of public speaking, especially to help the president get reelected. And it doesn't matter where I am. I can be in Texas, I can be in California. It doesn't matter whether it's my radio listeners, doesn't matter whether it's, veterans or what have you. Sooner or later, and it doesn't matter what the topic is, sooner or later, same question asked, wherever I am. What's he really like?
Yeah, we want to know.
Yeah, everybody wants to know. And I have to I don't want to disappoint people, but I have to disabuse you of any expectation, because if you've been alive, if you've got a pulse and you've been breathing for the last 8 years, 20 years, 30 years, you know exactly what my old boss is like. Why? Because unlike all the other scuzz buckets in this city, what you see is what you get. When I first worked here in the 90s, and I was doing defense stuff for the RAND Corporation, and I had to go to all the socialite meetings and blah, 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 and the embassy things, and I detested it. I hate the cocktail circuit. And I came up with the phrase, the Washington handshake, because as soon as you were at an event, and I'm a newbie, and I introduce myself, whoever I'm shaking my hands with, he's already looking over my shoulder to see if there's somebody more important in the room he should rather be talking to. This place is full of posers, grifters, and you name it.
Sounds like a Conservative Party conference, that one.
Ouch. Not Maggie's, the current Conservative Party. So this guy, whether he's in front of a stadium of 60,000 MAGA hat wearing supporters, or whether he's with me by himself in the Oval Office, he's exactly the same. What you see is what you'll get. There's none of this Janus-faced, big smiles and grins and kissing babies in public and then scumbucket behind closed doors. He is exactly the same by himself in the Oval Office. I mean, that first meeting in Trump Tower, that was the summer of 2015, and I spent 5.5 years in the Defense Department. I was a professor of irregular warfare and counterterrorism, and then I ended up at the Marine Corps University in Quantico, where I had the chair for military history. And I'm sitting there prepping for a class, and I get this call from somebody called Corey Lewandowski. I had no idea who this guy was. He was at the time the campaign manager for candidate Trump, and at the time we had 17 candidates in the Republican Party who were vying in the primaries to defeat each other and become the conservative candidate. And Lewandowski says, "Hi, I'm Corey, blah, blah, blah. Mr. Trump, candidate Trump, is preparing for the autumn debate on national security. He wants somebody to prep him because it's not his background. Would you be interested in meeting him?" And I'm like, the guy from reality TV, the guy with the golf courses and the golden, skyscrapers. And I thought, well, he's an American and he's interested in national security, so why not? So they flew me to New York. I saw him, just the three of us, literally, him behind his iconic desk, me in front of the desk, and Corey in the corner. And we had this just amazing blue sky discussion on national security, from, the Civil War to ISIS to the non-utility of nuclear weapons. I mean, the range was stunning. And clearly this guy had a real interest in it as an amateur, but a real interest. And then he does this classic Trumpism, which is, exactly like he does, in front of a, stadium of supporters. He stops the conversation dead, turns to Corey and goes, "I like this guy. Let's hire him." So I became his advisor on national security issues for the debates. I signed an NDA, so me and Stormy Daniels have that in common. And I wrote him papers on North Korea, ISIS, Russia, Iran, China. And then I got more involved eventually over time with the campaign, with General Flynn, who would come in as national security advisor. And then I ended up in the White House. But, to put it bluntly, what you see is what you get. There's nothing different about him behind closed doors in comparison to what he is like in public life, which in this city, in Washington, D.C., is very refreshing.
Yeah, I can see the appeal there. In fact, and General Flynn has signed a painting on my wall of my lounge, which was the Operation Herrick Afghanistan official portrait for the intelligence corps, and it's called Fixing Intel. And it's signed.
Well, that was the title of his study on making battlefield intelligence actually work for the operator. Great study. It's unclassified. People should read it.
And it's a beautiful painting, the one I've got from that time. It's very atmospheric, that's for sure. And I mean, did he listen to advice, Trump? Because I think COVID era, it has really put experts to the fore, and a reliance on delegating responsibility from elected people to experts, and often blaming experts as well when they can't take the responsibility like they should do as elected people. Is he someone that did listen, or do you think that we kind of over rely on experts in our politics?
Well, that's a separate topic, and I think it's fair to say that the expert monopoly is dead. I mean, from Ferguson to Fauci, these guys are hacks. We have the phrase in America, CYA, all they're about is covering your ass or their own ass. So let me describe his method of decision-making. Number one, he has a preternatural instinct for knowing what the right thing is. He's not interested in yes men. He wants you to present as many reasonable options to him, and then he'll choose and he'll be decisive, like, killing the 300 Wagner guys in Syria, or, using the cruise missiles against that Assad base. And beyond that, he really wants to hear your opinion before he makes a decision. Let me illustrate this with another declassified story. So, because of the way it was stupidly written, Obama's JCPOA Iran deal had to be re-upped every 6 months. The incumbent president has to decide, yes, we're going to keep allowing Iran to do this. Yes, we're going to keep, giving them whatever money. And it was coming up to the 6-month period for the new president to decide. And he had this, instinctual thing that this doesn't make sense. Why are we giving a regime that hates us billions of dollars? And in a matrix that doesn't actually stop them eventually from getting nuclear weapons. So he called me and Steve into the Oval. He called us his heavies.
So
and
Steve Bannon, who you're referring to.
Yep. Sorry, Steve Bannon. So Steve Bannon was chief strategist to the president in something called the Strategic Initiatives Group of the White House, and I was his deputy. I was strategist to the president. And the president had a raid in front of him on the sofa, standing in an armchair, basically the whole cabinet. General H.R. McMaster, the new National Security Advisor, Mnuchin, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, on and on and on. And he called us in and we stood there and he said, all right, my lads, my heavies, tell these gentlemen why the Iran deal is bad. Now, he knew why it was bad, but he wanted us, his strategists, to back him up. And we told him why it's bad for the region, why it's bad for Israel, why it's bad for America, and a system that doesn't actually stop Iran getting nuclear weapons has to be killed. And then he listened to everybody else in the cabinet who were multilateral, I won't give out any names, but the refrain most often from them was, "Oh, you can't do that. What would our European allies say? They'd be so annoyed at us. We can't do it by ourselves. We can't pull the plug on this." And so they did their shtick. We gave our justification, and then the president pulled the plug the very next day. And it's one of my proudest moments in my time in the White House that he listens and then he takes the decision. And one thing that nobody will believe, especially the mainstream, corporate media, because they just hate the guy. They're like, TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, is how thoughtful he is. So I worked in the White House, so he knows who I am. My wife was a presidential appointee, but she was over at the Department of Homeland Security. She was doing counter, violent extremism stuff. And she ended up as press secretary to Customs and Border Protection. So, formally she worked for him, but she was like, 15 miles away. I'd left the White House, started my radio show, and I hadn't been in the Oval Office for a couple of years. And I decided, as part of my second book, Why We Fight, to have an update from the president about his vision and to interview him. So I said, can I come in and talk to you, sir? So I went there and I interviewed him, and it's the first appendix of my second book. But here's the stunning thing. I've basically literally just stepped into the Oval. I'm still 30 feet away from the Resolute desk. And he sees me and he says, "Hey, Seb, how's Katie?" And I go, what? Yeah, she's great. Thank you, Mr. President. It's like, just the thoughtfulness of the man to ask me about a woman he met twice at the White House Christmas party. That's the side of President Trump the corporate mainstream media and the Democrat Party denies the existence of, because they're just driven by bile or hatred or something.
Yeah. It's really good to be able to have that insight, because and having worked for a few politicians myself, and I do get asked the question, what's Grant Shapps like, the Secretary of State for Defense? Spent 3 years working with the guy, got to know his family really well. And I'm able to present a side beyond the politics that is presented by the media. And it's quite a privilege, actually. And it's just genuine. I still get invited back for the Christmas party, and it's really touching all these years later that he still remembers his people that work for him all these years later. And that's really good to see. And I'll always tell people about it, because it's the truth.
Well, one more story about the Christmas party you just reminded me. So this was mind-blowing. So the White House, as we said, is pretty small. So the official presidential Christmas party is actually, a dozen parties, because they have to stagger them in the month of December. And every time, the West Wing is just packed to the rafters, 400 or 500 people like sardines. However, if you get the right color ticket, it was red in this occasion, you're on the special whatever VIP list. And what happens is about an hour into the party, a military aide will come find you and then escort you and your wife downstairs to the China room, where you get your official Christmas photograph with the president and the first lady. And we're like super excited, because I haven't been there for a while. I'm supporting the boss from the outside. And so we're at the front of the line in the next room with my wife, Katie, waiting for the portrait. And I can see the president and Melania standing in front of the fireplace with the photographer ready to take the first photograph. And I see him turn to one of his aides in the corner and gesture with his head. And I'm thinking, I know he's seen me. What's all that about? And as we're called in by the military aide to stand with the president and Melania, the other staffer hands the president a big manila envelope that he hides behind his back. And we do the grin, we do the smile for the camera. He says, "Hi, Sebastian. Hi, Katie. How are you doing? Merry Christmas." And then as we're leaving, he shoves the manila envelope in my hand and says, "This is for you, sir." "Thank you, Mr. President." And we leave because, everybody's coming in for the next photograph, blah, 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 blah. And I open it. And in it is an article I wrote for The Hill, which is a big, DC website publication, about what President Trump's foreign policy and why it kept us safe and our enemies afraid. And I'd written this 5 weeks ago. And on it, in his inimitable, massive, fat Sharpie, he said, "Nice job, Seb!" exclamation on the printout. Now stop for a second, John, and just think about this. The guy who's negotiating with Little Kim in North Korea, who's crushing the ISIS caliphate, who's securing the border, sees his old deputy assistant has written an article, tells somebody, "Print that now, give it to me," puts his little imprimatur on it, and then says, "File it until the Christmas party the Gorkas are coming to." Then remembers out of the dozen parties that this is the one Seb's coming to, says, "Get me the article, put it in an envelope, and stand in the corner until they arrive." And you go, "Oh my giddy aunt, that's the president of the United States. That's who the real Donald Trump is."
I always say that small touches are important in life, handwritten letters, those kind of things. But you're right, at that level, to be able to remember, that's pretty impressive. And I'm assuming that's in a frame in a downstairs toilet somewhere now.
It is. It's along with my old Incorps, oath.
I was going to say, actually, in the Ink Corps, we are trained to be able to deliver truth to power and to be able to, at a relatively junior level, so Lance Corporals, when they leave training, to be able to brief generals and politicians.
Yeah, right.
I mean, did you lean into those kind of skills that you had learned from your time in the Intelligence Corps to assist you in your role? Was there anything that you remember?
I've never had problems with talking truth to authority. If you see my last evaluations in the Ink Corps, you'll see a lot of problems I had with authority back then.
Funny enough, I've dug out your old reports from the end. No.
Yeah, I was a bit stroppy by the end of my time because I've always had issues with authority. I don't know how I got past selection, honestly. I was a long-haired philosophy and theology student in the University of London, and on a dare, a buddy of mine, Guy, you know who you are, who was in training, cadre, got me to, this unmarked building in the middle of London on a Friday night, and ended up, getting a pair of overalls, green overalls, and getting on a, a 4-ton truck to some godforsaken, exercise field in the middle of nowhere. So, no, I think the Ink Corps didn't establish any kind of, stroppiness that wasn't there already. I don't know. I think I'm older than you, but the Ink Corps was just weird. It was just such a bunch of wacky weirdos.
Same. Yeah, it's still the same.
And I loved it. I mean, think about this. Typical British Army. So I was 18, I was an undergrad, and I spoke fluent Hungarian because of my parents who escaped communism. I'd learned German pretty well and French in school like everybody, and then a little bit of Polish because I mucked around with the Polish scouts in Ealing. So I speak Hungarian, French, German, a bit of Polish. So what do they decide? Oh, you'll be an interrogator in 22 Company and you're going to learn Russian. Cheers, mate, because none of those languages have really anything to do with Russian, okay? Especially Hungarian. And so what do? First day after I've, passed selection and whatever, and done my basic, intern side training to be a prison tactical, what do they call it? Tactical questioner.
Yeah, TQ.
Right. And first day of language class, in walks this fat major who I don't know, 50-year-old major. And for the next 2 hours, to people who know nothing, speaks only Russian to us. Just Russian for 2 hours. That's the craziness of the Inco, these eccentric weirdos. And I kid you not, by the end of that 2 hours, we could do a rudimentary interrogation in Russian. Как ваше имя? Я jestem soldat. I mean, I can still remember these phrases from the first class of me not knowing any Russian from 1990. The Inco was a place for people who, there's a thing in Hungarian, the people who scratch their left ear with their right hand, people who just think a little bit differently. And I love that. And just analytic skills. One of the things that kills me the most in modern politics, on left and right, is just the crap people believe, thanks to the internet, whether it's QAnon, whether it's Blue Anon, whether it's, the earth is flat and we never went to the moon. I have a mission beyond getting the president reelected to kill this lack of critical thinking we have in Western civilization. I think if anything that the Inco did for me, it's a respect for the eccentric, and also the fact that we have to start thinking critically again. I don't care if you're a brain surgeon, a car mechanic, you've got to think critically, and you've got to understand the sources. If you don't question and access the primary source for the intelligence or the information that you've been given, then you're not a grown-up. You're not a serious mind.
Yeah, and that's something as an instructor teaching military intelligence, that constant curiosity is what we wanted to evoke.
Yeah.
And that critical thinking and removing those biases as well, which is why I never used to ask any of my trainees what they did for a living outside of the intelligence school, because I didn't want my own bias on what they did, because we have plenty of people that work in politics, for the police or in defense intelligence in their day jobs. But it's important for us to be able to be a bit more critical in our own thinking. And then hopefully get a better product out the other ends. But so you're looking to the future now, and in the intelligence call, we like to make an assessment. There's a bit of a you have to live in a cave in the middle of the Amazon to not know that President Trump is being indicted at the moment. I think 91 felony charges.
730 years in prison he's facing.
730 years in prison facing, 2 at state, 2 at federal. And they're across kind of 4 main streams around allegations of fraud, hush money, election subversion, and basically dodgy document keeping. I mean, what is your assessment about the likely outcome? Do you think this is having an impact on him? Because you've got to be pretty resilient to undergo all those. I mean, I think many of us think it's obviously making him more popular amongst his voter base. Yeah. But what's your assessment for the future?
Well, look, I've been through a little of that myself, being his deputy assistant. They came after me. I had one journalist write 52 hit pieces on me in 3 months, including an attack against my 18-year-old son. Used the word traitor in the headline. So it's like 0.1% of what he and his family have been through. But I don't know how he does it. I mean, he has no baggage to protect him. My father was given a life sentence after being tortured by the secret police at the age of 20 in a communist nation. So, I've got an excuse to be the loud, Larry, conservative, supporting the president and say, screw you. I don't care what you say about me or my family. He doesn't have that. I mean, he grew up in Queens, New York, working for his dad, who was, a constructor in construction. I don't know how he does it. When I was there at Mar-a-Lago, when he announced November before last that he's running again, and halfway through the speech, and if your listeners haven't watched it, it's one of his best speeches. It's a relatively short one. It's about 40 minutes long. It's the relaunch of his campaign. And halfway through, I'm the guy who worked for him in the White House, and I had like this gut punch. I thought, oh my God, he's doing it again. After what they put him through, a man whose daughter is Jewish, whose grandkids are Jewish, the first president in 23 years to keep our promise to Israel and move the embassy and recognize Jerusalem. He's the guy they're accusing of being a racist and anti-Semite. Why would you go through this again? And he's doing it for love of country. So I think the assaults energize him. You look at the rallies. The rallies, I mean, look at the primary results. He's breaking all records as a primary. He beat Bernie Sanders' results, you know, the socialist who honeymooned in the Soviet Union, in New Hampshire, which isn't a very, trust me, I know New Hampshire well, isn't a very conservative state. He broke Bernie Sanders' primary results. So, you know, he's getting more and more popular. I don't know how he deals with it. What is my expectation? Look, predictions are a mug's game, because nobody ever gets asked 8 months later, Gorka, you said this, and then, you know, whatever. But I don't think any of these cases will go to trial. And if they do, and I know you're trying to be apolitical, but let me just...
I'll try.
It's part of my answer. The people who hate him, who are trying to make sure that the American people aren't allowed to vote for him, because we have politicians who are trying to remove his name from ballots. I mean, if there's anything that's fascistic, it's that, saying that the American people aren't allowed to choose who they want to be their president. The people who are doing that, whether it's the rogue judges, members of the Democrat Party, you know, special prosecutors, they're pretty moronic. You know, they're on the level of like clinical imbecile. Why? Because they haven't read the US Constitution. The US Constitution has only 3 express requirements for somebody to be president. Nothing else. Number 1, they have to be a natural born citizen. They have to be born here or born to American parents. Number 2, they have to be over the age of 35. And number 3, they have to have lived continuously in America for the last 14 years. Doesn't say they can't be a convicted felon. So you can do whatever you like to him. He can still be president and then pardon himself. So, you know, they're so driven by hatred and ideology that they haven't even realized that the thing they're doing to him constantly that makes him even more popular every time they ratchet it up can't really constitutionally neutralize him. That's the arrogance of the people who are trying to take down my former boss.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's fascinating to watch from this side. And I think we have to go back to 1920, and Eugene Debs got 1 million votes as a candidate whilst being in prison. So it's been, people have accepted votes before. I think that age limit of being, was it over 35?
35, yeah.
I think that's probably what we should have in UK politics. That would certainly shape up some of that as well. And before we go, thank you for all of that, by the way. It's been fascinating to get those insights. You did have, and one of those insights into you and your oratory was at the Oxford Union debate. I mean, that looks like fun. What was that like?
Look, I thought twice about it because A, they don't pay you a dime. You have to even travel on your own ticket. So you travel, you know, 5,000 miles to talk for literally 11 minutes, you know, out of your own pocket. But then I thought, this is the oldest debating society in the world. I was in the debate club at St. Benedict's Abbey in Ealing. And I got to give them kudos, because this is the Oxford Union is kind of affiliated with the university, but it's an independent entity that's had Ronald Reagan, Einstein, Maggie Thatcher debate there. So you're in pretty good company. And kudos to the president and the whole committee there, because what was the motion before the House? The motion before the House was, this House fears the return of President Trump. And they invited me, right, who's got a pretty, you know, established, hardcore conservative reputation, having worked in the White House, to come to their august building and debate. So you don't have a First Amendment in the UK, but I respect their commitment to freedom of speech. So I had a lot of fun. And think of this, I'm in the heart of darkness when it comes to wokeism, right? Oxbridge, you know, Cambridge and Oxford, it's the heart of wokeism. And I had like 40%, over 100 students at Oxford vote with me for President Trump, because I argued against the motion. I said, no, the only people who should fear President Trump are bad guys like ISIS, Putin, Kim, the mullahs. And over 100 kids at Oxford, I'm satisfied.
Yeah, and like you say, full credit to them for actually inviting you to be able to speak, because we're in the business at universities in the UK at the moment of cancelling
Yeah,
debate, cancelling speakers because it doesn't fit with their own particular agenda. And that, I mean, it's not even the thin end of the wedge, it's way down
right,
the
right.
road. So credit and kudos. And for those that are interested in that debate, I'll put the links in the comments as well, because it's a really good debate to have a look at.
Over 1 million views in 5 days. You guys should check it out. It's just 11 minutes long. It's on the Oxford Union YouTube.
Yeah, it's snackable. So yeah, we'll put those links in the show notes. And before we let you go, you cite your journey as pretty exceptional, as we discussed, into politics. If you were to throw the rope down to others like you from similar backgrounds, I mean, first of all, would you, or would you say run a mile from politics? And what advice would you give?
First, I want to ask you a question. Thank you for taking the time, and God bless you for all you do for the veterans of the UK and with your international platform. I got a question. Is the British Army still there? Because the TA that I grew up in, I loved it and I miss it. Or, bullying my boots. I was one of these sick bastards that actually enjoyed marching up and down the square, as Monty Python would put it. Is the British Army a shadow of its former self, or is it still there?
Well, I joined in 1996 and I'm just about to be mentally discharged from the Army Reserves. I've been through the changes, but what I think remains is the quality of its people and its values.
Good.
Technology will change, conflict will change. And, from my first tour in Northern Ireland to my last in Afghanistan, you adapt. Some things have changed for the better, but some things, you do look back, pull up the sandbag, swing the light and think, oh, in the good old days. But I
Right.
think what is the constant is the quality of our people. Our training does, I believe, make robust individuals, and the society we recruit from may be criticised. Young people are always under fire, but let's not forget that young people in 1914 were probably slated. And the generation that went to Iraq and Afghanistan were deemed the PlayStation generation, and they did some pretty exceptional things in those theatres of conflict.
Right.
So yeah, I do remain hopeful, but we do need a larger defence. That's unquestionable. We have shrunk beyond all it all means, and then we're struggling in that regard. And the
Yeah.
Army Reserves, the reserve forces are about 28,000, so that's not big enough in terms of the homeland resilience side of what we do as well. But it's I love it. I still love the British Army, always will, and the other two services will. And what will remain is our character and our values.
Good. That's good to hear. All right. So to my advice, would I counsel doing what I've done? To quote my late father, he always said when I was a kid, politics, filthy, disgusting. Oh, but oh, so interesting. And here's my plea, my call to arms for everyone out there. I get guests on the show from various walks of life. I'm a big gun guy, so the Second Amendment that we have here, and I'll give an example. A couple of the massive names, the content providers in gun reviews and stuff that I've invited onto my gun hour. They've said in the emails, "I'll come on, but no politics." And I've coached them gently to say, you know what, Ian or John, if you're into guns, you're already political, because there are people who want to take them away from you because they think only the military or the police should have them. We lived through this in the UK. It's one of the reasons I left. And I want to expand that aperture to everyone who loves the country that they're a citizen of, the UK, the US. You have no luxury not to get politically engaged. It's just not an option. When they're telling you you have to get vaccinated against your wish, or you're only allowed out the house for 1 hour a day, or your kid has to wear a mask, politics has already taken control of your lives, whether you wanted it to or not. As Trotsky said, allegedly, you may not be interested in war, but war is definitely interested in you. So if my wife, who detests politics because she's sane, can be so horrified by something she sees happen at the local library, says to me one day, "Hey, I'm running for local office. I just wanted you to tell you." And I'm going, you mean you're asking my advice and my permission if you could do so? She said, no, I've collected the signatures, I'm doing it. If my wife can do that and win, and if my wife on election day, as I'm literally in Mar-a-Lago, November before, I was eating the lovely coconut shrimp in Mar-a-Lago with the president. What's my wife doing? Up at 4:30, comes home, because I can see it on my phone on the security cameras, comes home at 10:30 at night. So what's she doing for 18 hours? She is the chief election officer in our district to make sure there are no shenanigans around that election. If Katie Gorka can be that political, then you don't have an excuse. And the question is, if you love the country, should it just be up to other people to defend it? Or if you've hung up your combats and your DPM or whatever, is that it? Are you done with it? And I have the highest respect for those who go from the military, have a little bit of a breather, and then get involved with politics, because you are literally serving again. It's in your blood. You may not be wearing, your boots, but you are doing exactly what you did previously with a gun, with a uniform, and whether you're a copper, whether you're a TA guy, whether you're regular, it's what we do if we love our country. As I say to my listeners, if not you, then who? If not now, then when? Protecting a nation isn't just a wartime activity, and protecting a nation's values isn't something that other people need to do. That's my advice. You make the decision, right? Because it's tough. It can be really tough. And your family has to be behind you. You have to have that compass of faith to kind of guide you in your values. But really, whose country is it? Is it somebody else's country, or is it your country?
Great words there. Fascinating conversation. And as I say, stand up and serve again.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Dr. Sebastian Gorka, thank you so much.
Cheers, Johnny.
Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.